First, Cuba's record of supporting terrorism and violence in the Western Hemisphere threatens the U.S. national security interest in the region. According to the State Department's Country Reports on Terrorism in 2013, which was issued in April 2014, Cuba has long provided safe haven to members of the Basque Fatherland and Liberty, or ETA, and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as FARC, both considered foreign terrorist organizations by the United States. Cuba also continues to harbor fugitives wanted in the United States through providing support such as housing, food ration books, and medical care. Furthermore, the U.S. fugitives such as Joanne Chesmard, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, who is on the FBI's most wanted terrorism list, remain protected by the Cuban government for their crimes against the Americas. In addition, according to the Institute for Cuban and Cuban American Studies at the University of Miami, Cuba provides intelligence to Hezbollah and Hamas. For instance, Arab Shiites, Ghazi Nasser al-Din and Fawzi Kanan, based in Venezuela, coordinate with the Cuban government to raise funds for Hezbollah and facilitate Hezbollah's travel in the region. Likewise, Hezbollah in Cuba, a Hamas-funded Turkish charity, operates in Havana and is a member of the Union of Good, an entity that financially supports Hamas. Second, Cuba's record as a foreign intelligence collector and trafficker threatens United States national security and the safety of Americans. Overt in its espionage against the United States and in selling U.S. national security secrets to other regimes such as Venezuela and Iran, Cuban intelligence services has been described by former CIA Cuban analyst Brian Littell as among the 4 or 5 best anywhere in the world. In 2002, Defense Intelligence Agency analyst Ana Montes was convicted of spying for Cuban intelligence for 16 years. This month, the DIA director, Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart, maintained that foreign intelligence threats from Russia, China, and Cuban intelligence services continue to be a challenge, with Cuban intelligence services remaining the predominant counterintelligence threat to the United States emanating from Latin America. American tourists or businessmen and women who visit Cuba could find themselves subjected to Cuban surveillance. By staying in hotels, which are run, by the way, by the Cuban military and staffed by Cuban intelligence agents, wired for video and audio recording, American visitors are prey for Cuban espionage. In view of this, I believe it's critical that the Obama administration fully assess these potentially great vulnerabilities to American citizens in its review of Cuba's sponsorship of terrorism. Any attempt by the Obama administration to delist Cuba without first providing Congress with a comprehensive damage assessment of Cuba's counterintelligence activities against Americans could invite even more Cuban espionage against unsuspecting Americans in the future. Thirdly, Cubans' relationship with hostile regimes such as Iran, North Korea, Russia, Syria, and Venezuela threaten U.S. national security interests. Cuba is a strong supporter of Iran's illicit nuclear program and the Assad regime's brutality against its people in Syria. In July of 2013, Cuba was caught red-handed proliferating illicit military equipment, including fighter jets, surface-to-air missile system components, and ammunition to North Korea, illegally circumventing the UN embargo. In Venezuela, Cuba has trained pro-Maduro groups who use violence against Venezuelan student protesters, and media reports in January of this year found that hundreds of Cuban military personnel had been stationed in Venezuela. Most significant for the U.S. homeland, Cuban-Russian relations have continued to deepen. In February of last year, 2014, the Russian defense minister stated that Russia wants to build a military base in several countries in our hemisphere, including Cuba. In April of 2014, the U.S. observed 2 Russian ships operating in waters beyond the U.S. territorial seas near Cuba, and press reports suggested that the ships were part of a spying operation against the U.S. Furthermore, in July of last year, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Cuba and forgave 90% of Cuba's debt since the Soviet period, the largest debt forgiveness agreement in Russian history. Now, what's that all about? Press reports have also stated that Russia and Cuba agreed to reopen the Lourdes base, an electronic listening post, which is only 150 miles from the United States coast. Last month, the Russian signals intelligence ship made an unannounced visit to Cuba on the eve of U.S. talks with Cuba and Havana on restoring diplomatic relations. And also last month, Cuban President Raul Castro demanded that the U.S. hand back the U.S. naval station in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, before Cuba and the U.S. could attain normalized relations. Given Cuba's alliances with unsavory regimes, the U.S. national security impact of complying with such brash demands which severely hindered U.S. military efforts in the region. Gitmo is the oldest overseas U.S. naval base and the only permanent DoD base in the region. It's critical for U.S. national security interests, and it houses not only the Joint Task Force Guantanamo, but also the Homeland Security and State Department's Migrant Operations Center. Its location enables U.S. forces to maintain strategic, operational, and tactical advantages across a full spectrum of military operations and regional security cooperation efforts. Fourth, a criminal pipeline from Cuba to Florida threatens the United States' national security interest, with Cuban migrants exploiting U.S. law, stealing from the American taxpayer, and paying the Cuban government to live large off the cash in Cuba. In January 2015, South Florida's Sun Sentinel published the findings of a year-long investigation which showed that crooks from Cuba had robbed American businesses and taxpayers of more than $2 billion over 2 decades. Cuba benefits from organized crime rings operating in Cuba and the United States. For example, in Miami-Dade County, Florida, where 24% of the population was born in Cuba, immigrants from the island account for 73% of arrests for health care fraud, 72% of arrests for cargo theft, 59% of arrests for marijuana trafficking, and half the arrests for credit card and insurance fraud. However, Cuba exploitation of Americans is not limited just to Florida. According to the Sun Sentinel's analysis, over the past 2 decades, Cuban natives with addresses in Florida have been convicted in 34 states, Puerto Rico, and Washington, D.C. In addition, a 2012 case showed that a Cuban crime ring stole 22,000 credit card numbers and then used them to buy 60,000 gift cards worth $15 million from Walmart stores in 45 states and Puerto Rico. Some of the convicted individuals learned their illicit trade in Cuba before immigrating to the United States, and some fugitives who returned to Cuba had to give the government a cut of the money, benefiting the Castro regime. The investigation also found that the Obama administration's recent Cuba policy change in loosening U.S. regulations on travel and money to Cuba may actually increase organized crime as well. This is particularly concerning given the surge in Cuban migration in the United States following the Cuba policy change. According to the U.S. Coast Guard, Cuban migrant flow increased 68% from 2013 to 2014, and Cuban migration to the U.S. is also much higher thus far in 2015 than it was at the same time last year. In conclusion, Cuba's role in supporting terrorism and violence, conducting foreign intelligence operations against the United States, partnering with global bad actors, and enabling a criminal pipeline from Cuba to Florida is clear. Such a record necessitates that we carefully examine the impact that the Obama administration's Cuban policy change may have on U.S. national security and Cuba's ability to more easily conduct its illicit operations. Today's hearing could not be more timely, given the U.S. and Cuban officials meet in Washington tomorrow to continue discussing reestablishment of diplomatic relations. With that, I'll turn to the ranking member, Mr. Sears, for his opening statement. I look forward to a very robust hearing today, providing information to members of Congress as we move forward addressing these policy changes. So, Mr. Sears is recognized for an opening statement.